with us. She's going to be talking about her new book that just came out this fall called To Be Creative. And she's going to be telling you a little bit about the book, and you'll have a chance to ask a few questions. So if you have questions, please type them in the comments underneath the video. We'll see them here, and we'll get to them at the end. I just want to mention also that Mary is also doing a workshop, a Zoom workshop with Majors and Quinn this Sunday at 3 p.m. And I will drop the link to that in the chat as well. That is a $5 to sign up, but for signing up, you do get mailed to you a magic pencil and notepad, and you'll learn all about the legacy of the magic pencil, as Mary calls it, if you attend that workshop, where it'll be a little more interactive. It'll be on Zoom, so we'll get to talk to each other. But for now, we're just going to learn about this new book called To Be Creative. So it's a great option if you're trying to restart your creativity or explore it for the first time. So I am going to also drop a link to that book, which is available at majorsandquinn.com. It's also available in the store if you do happen to be in the Twin Cities area and want to drop by. We really appreciate your support, whether you're just watching or whether you do want to purchase the book. And we will see your questions at the end of this presentation. For now, I'm going to leave the screen and let Mary tell you all about Called to Be Creative.
Thank you. So welcome everybody, and all you creative people out there, because you are all creative, and I wouldn't write this book if I didn't believe that. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book, which will kind of explain itself as to why I wrote the book. My mother had lived an extremely creative life, partly by necessity, more by invention. Raising 10 children in abject poverty, she beautified her home with colorful rag rugs and quilts made from scraps of material. She sewed tiny denim jumpers out of her own skirts and teddy bears from cast-off woolen coats. She managed to fill 12 hungry bellies by gutting chickens, gathering eggs, canning and freezing produce, and inventing half a dozen ways to incorporate tomatoes and potatoes into recipes. Then, during her spare time, she'd draw pastel pictures, carve beautiful wooden statues, paint on barn boards, selling many of these creations as a home business. By the world's standards, Mom left little of material value behind. When my siblings and I divided her things, it was the remaining wood carvings, paintings, homemade teddy bears, and quilts that each of us wanted. No one objected when I claimed the notebooks my mother had written in at night while sitting at the dining room table. Nor did they complain when I carried home 4 or 5 versions of each of her 3 unpublished manuscripts, or idea files she'd constructed from brown paper sacks sewn together in crude scrapbook form. As the writer in the family, it seemed apt I would become the keeper of her words. I can admit now that I also coveted her dining room table, but it went to my youngest sister, Jane. I spent a lot of time alone in my mother's empty house during the weeks following her death, sitting at that table, praying and writing. All winter and well into the spring, I utilized the house, reveling in the unaccustomed silence. During breaks from writing, I'd pore over the remaining boxes of her possessions, searching for clues to the enigma of a mother who'd managed to spend a lifetime practicing her varied talents. Words collided with images from a distant past as I wrote my way through that winter. I worked in a fog of grief that brought memories of my mother and me to the forefront, the two of us at parallel play, sitting on the front porch, her with art and me with words. She would paint, sew, or carve something beautiful from a piece of wood, while my teenage self wrote angst-filled poetry or short stories. Once, we were both painting in companionable silence when we heard a noise at the entrance to the porch. My father stood there, taping a handwritten sign on the window of the closed door. Caution, artists at work. Don't enter these premises unless you are talented. he'd scrawled in red ink. Years later, Mom framed the torn and wrinkled sign and gave it to me. For Mary, one of the artists on the premises. From Mom, the other one she'd written in pencil on the back. I worked on many projects in my mother's house that winter of discontent. 10 miles from home, I'd found the room of my own that Virginia Woolf had insisted every female writer needed. I managed to accomplish as much in 12 weeks writing at my mother's table as I had in the previous 12 months at home. I credited the solitude, Mom's creative spirit, and perhaps the table itself for my productivity, worrying it would all dissipate once the house sold and the table was delivered to my sister. After the last of my mother's things were removed from her house, I walked slowly through the rooms, checking for missed items, dusting every bare surface. My 3 young daughters trailed behind me. The inventory check and the last-minute cleaning also served as a delay to saying goodbye to the home I'd grown up in. The house had become a refuge for me in the previous months, while I treated it as my private writing retreat. It was hard to let it go. It was the final day before we closed the house for good and turned the keys over to a realtor. Running my dust cloth along the window panes of the front porch that had served as Mom's workroom, I contemplated all the hours she'd spent in there. My fingertips hit an object that gave a little, sliding across the sill of one window. It was an extremely thin pencil, emblazoned with advertising. I held it aloft for my daughters to see. "Look, one of Grandma's magic pencils," I teased. "Just think, this is a pencil she probably used to draw rough sketches for what would later become a painting." The girls were well aware of Grandma's talent, impressed by her wood carvings, her barn board and canvas paintings, and the quilts and teddy bears she'd crafted. They considered her a bona fide artist. Their mother? Not so much. Scribbling down words hardly seemed a creative endeavor in comparison to painting, drawing, or wood carving. They'd never even seen the thin folder I kept hidden away in a cabinet. Quirky sketches and pastel creations I'd saved from art classes I'd loved as a teen. I'd always been enticed by creativity in many forms, skipping the more useful home economics classes for art, drama, and creative writing. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, my mother's pencil in hand, and a sheet of white plain printer paper in front of me. I used to enjoy art classes, I thought wistfully, wondering if I'd retained any artistic ability. As a teen, I'd labored over sketches depicting the bare bones of winter trees with looming trunks and spindly branches, never quite mastering the leaves. My art teacher had praised those drawings. I began sketching, pleased to see a tree taking form on the paper. I hadn't noticed 11-year-old Katie approach. I looked up when I heard a gasp, my eyes meeting Katie's incredulous pair. I smiled at her apparent shock, holding up the pencil with a flourish. "You drew that?" she asked. "You can't draw. It really is a magic pencil. Can I try it next?" Later that day, I brought out the folder introducing my daughter to a mother they didn't know existed, the one who'd practiced art. Determined to impart a lesson, I explained that even if we have a natural talent for something, if we don't hone it with hours of work, our talents become rusty with disuse. "I used to enjoy sketching," I continued. "My drawing skills are as rusty as if I was a beginning art student. But I've been practicing writing for years." Their eyes betrayed their confusion, as if wondering why someone would choose writing over real art. That afternoon encounter led me to wonder why so many of us abandon interests we were drawn to as children. Do we each have a creative bent? Some talent that could be utilized in some manner if we practiced it? Could I just as easily have become an artist as a writer? That was an eye-opening moment for me and for my children. And indeed, losing that table and losing that house did not stop my creativity. In the year following the sale of the house, I attended my first two writers' conferences. I planned and implemented a writing course for homeschooled teens, and I designed another course for adults. I conducted workshops at local community colleges, which resulted in a weekly couponing column for an area newspaper. Several of my essays were accepted for anthologies, and I began doing public speaking. My mother never doubted for a moment that each of her children had talent. I began in one of my first speeches. I'd been asked to speak on creativity to a room full of young homeschooling moms. Do you believe the same thing about your children? The women nodded, smiling with pride. Do you encourage your children's natural gifts and spend money on training or lessons? Again came the nods. I paused before asking, but what about you? Do you ever doubt your own inherent creativity? Their smiles faded, and they suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. A few months later, I did the same presentation for a group of women at the other end of the spectrum, empty nesters and retirees. When I asked about their talents, their replies were heartbreaking, ranging from, I don't have talent, to, it's too late for me now. There's a book in this somewhere, I thought then. And once home, I made notes that I filed in a file folder labeled Creativity. Keep in mind that was 2011. 7 years and 5 books later, during an equally discontented winter, when I was miserable at a job that should have been perfect for me, I spent a morning reading letters my mother had written to me during the 1980s and 1990s, letters I hadn't looked at since. Before long, I was shaking with sobs. What was wrong? Had I can't say what I wrote. Had the grief caught up with me? I'd lost my mother in 2010, my husband in 2012, and my grandson the following year. But as I continued reading my mother's letters, I realized it was the unmistakable message in them. Utilize your talents. Was I utilizing my talents working for a newspaper? Writing stories on agriculture and farming topics? Covering legislative coffees, school board, occasional human interest story? But those were few and far between. Because of my work hours, I'd lost my own morning writing time, dropped the writing classes I'd taught at community colleges, and said no to most workshops and public speaking opportunities. I'd given up those things that brought me joy in exchange for a paycheck and health insurance. When a library job with fewer hours and more free mornings was advertised, I took a leap of faith and applied for it. When I was in the position, I was nearly giddy with excitement over the idea of having some free mornings. Unsure what the topic of my next book would be, I knew I'd be writing one. That winter reminiscing contributed to an increased restlessness within me. I wanted to embark on a creative project. The week after I changed jobs, I submitted an article to a magazine and wrote 2 essays for an anthologies. But I yearned for something more, something bigger. Was it perhaps time to resurrect that creativity book? On March 11th, 2017, I retrieved a new journal from my cupboard, one with a photo image of my mother's table on it. Opening it up, I discovered I'd begun writing in it the month after she died, but had forgotten about it. A dozen pages were filled with quotes on creativity. I was certain then of my next project. I'd be writing about the artisan soul we are each born with. I pulled out that file folder I'd set aside nearly 7 years earlier and pored over the contents, increasingly excited about delving into a topic that had meant so much to my mother. I made copious notes in my new journal. By April, I was ready to begin work on a book proposal. I emailed the publisher of my previous books to ask if they'd be interested in seeing it upon completion, and he responded in the affirmative. That very afternoon, my sister Jane called. After a few minutes of casual conversation, her voice changed, catching a little as she got to the point of her call. You know, we're moving to a smaller house, she began. I felt a little prickle at the back of my neck. She hesitated before continuing, sounding near tears. I don't know why, but I feel like I'm supposed to give you Mom's table, that it's meant to be with you. Do you want it? Well, of course the answer was yes. It was only after I hung up that it dawned on me. Not only would I be writing a book in honor of my mother's legacy of creativity, I'd be writing it at her table. So that's a little bit of reading from this book that ended up maybe being a love letter to my mother, but really is a book to encourage and inspire everybody to discover what it is inside of them that makes them feel alive, and encourage them to do more of it, whatever it is, because there's something in us that we saw as children. And there are activities in this book to kind of jumpstart that in our lives. It can be a book that is done with a group. I've done it with a lifelong learners creativity group. Just there's something in each of us, and I fully believe that with all my heart. It's not just my faith, but it's science behind it too. And so I do delve a little bit into the science, which I'll be talking about a little on Sunday, and also about how we can bring that creativity and reignite it in our own lives, especially today with the pandemic, and with we see how important it is for us to do things that are exciting to us. So if you have any questions, we'll be checking the chat for that.
Thank you, Mary. And yes, like Mary said, if you have questions, please ask them. Just comment under the video and you will see it. But I will start us off. So what do you consider to be the biggest myth about creativity?
The biggest myth about creativity is that it's for somebody else, or that it is somebody else and not you.
Mhm.
Because so often when we hear the word creativity, we think of a museum quality piece on the wall, or Michelangelo, or a famous person, instead of the little ways that a person can be creative or innovative in their life. And so it's not for somebody else. It's for us. It's for each of us. There's something in each of us that we can work into our everyday life. And it might just be an innovative way to, like I said, my mother using potatoes and carrots and tomatoes, and I don't know how many recipes because we grew them, but that was very innovative and creative of her to be able to do that. So it can be baking, it can be gardening, it can be, yes, painting, drawing, writing, music.
Yeah. Well, sort of with that, what advice would you give to maybe parents, a young parent or any parent with a house full of children, about finding time for creativity? I guess this might be particularly relevant right now.
So finding time, it might be more about making time,
Mhm.
because you probably won't find it. It's not just going to miraculously appear. And I hear too many, I'm sorry, but I hear too many younger women say, well, when the kids are older, then I will do, or when the kids are gone, then I will do whatever it is I'm interested in doing, or I don't have time. You know, a lot of us don't have time. So I like to, when I do workshops for writing, I love showing a picture of me in 1996, maybe. I'm not sure what year it is, but it's when I was still using a typewriter. And my son was like a year old on a backpack. I was hip. I was a hip mom using a backpack before that was popular, leaning over my shoulder watching me type, you know. And that was literally my life. Is I had 8 children, and so if I waited until they were gone, I'd still be waiting, because my youngest is 17 and she still lives at home with me. So it's not about finding the time, it's about making the time. And it isn't easy, it isn't always easy, but it's good for us as parents, and it's good for our children to see us doing things that we are excited about, so that they know, okay, you can be a parent and have a job, and you can, not that we can do it all, our house might be a mess, that's okay, because mine often is. I always say creative people are messy, but I don't know, maybe that's just a reason, an excuse. So it's, for me, sometimes it was about making a date with myself and going out for coffee and writing and leaving my husband with the kids when they were younger. Or it was about utilizing the time I did have, which might be 15 minutes snatched here and there. And that's okay too. Although if you get lost in something, and you will, if you start to figure out what it is that you love to do, you can get lost in it, and hours can go by. Then you know you're doing something that you're meant to do, because though you're in flow, they call it flow, and you are in the zone. And if it's exercise, people talk about in the zone too, but it's the same thing with creativity, or doing something we love, is we can get lost in it. But my kids grew up with a mother who they saw, I think they probably thought all mothers just sat in front of a typewriter and typed away and made words and played with words. And yeah, sometimes when they'd need something and I'd be looking at them, they could see that blank look, because I was still in the computer, or I was still in my head, which, you know, writers and creatives are tempted to do. But it's about making the time, and it's worth it, because you will be a happier and better parent if you are doing something you love. My husband was wonderful, but I know that sometimes I got grouchy if I wasn't doing what I was writing, if I wasn't writing. And he would say, don't you think it's time for you to go out and write? What he meant was, you're grouchy. Get out and go write. You're grouchy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, since we were sort of talking about finding the time, or making the time versus finding the time, and that, you know, that might look a little different these days. For example, you can't necessarily take yourself out for coffee.
Yeah.
You can't remove yourself from an environment. So what, if any, impact have these recent months of sheltering in place have had on your writing or creativity, your personal work?
Well, I did end up being sent home from my office for about 6 months, but I still worked from home, which was a big adjustment. And I would hear people say, "Oh, I have so much time. I've got time to do this, and I've got time to do that." And I'm thinking, well, and then they'd say, "What are you doing with your extra time?" And I think, well, I don't really have extra time, because I'm working from home. And I know a lot of parents are, and a lot of people are working from home. And so they don't really have that extra time. Or our healthcare workers who are maybe working overtime and extra hours, or the essential workers. My daughter works at a grocery store, so she was still going to work and stuff.
Wow.
So, but it's there's so many things we can't do, that it seems like that's one thing we do have control over, is how are we going to spend whatever time, whether we look at it as free time, and I hope people don't look at it as leisure time, that the only time they can do something creative is during leisure time, because that's one of the problems, is that then we will never find it. We will never find the time if we are waiting for that leisure time to just miraculously appear. But for me, I had to my brain wasn't quite into the writing mode at the beginning, but then I realized that unless I wrote my way through it, it was going to be really hard for me to handle. So I did a lot of journaling, a lot of letter writing, sending cards. I was still writing essays. It might have been a different kind of writing, but I think I filled 2 journals so far in the last 7 months, and usually I might fill 1 just in a year, maybe 2 in a year. So it was writing my way through it, and I encourage people to do that, even if they never want to be a writer. During this time, writing, there is science behind benefits to writing, journaling, expressive writing, and it can be messy. Your emotions are messy. You don't even have to keep it. You can rip it up after you've written it down, but it's just, there's a science behind working your way through things like a pandemic through writing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned in your book post-traumatic growth. What does that mean, and what's its relationship to creativity? And maybe for people who aren't familiar with your work, Mary has written before on the relationship between grief and creative stuff.
So we hear a lot about post-traumatic stress,
Mhm.
and it's a very real thing. And doctors and hospitals are starting to realize that bringing somebody into, even when my husband went through cancer in 2006, they handed him a paper at the chemotherapy room that would allow him to have a free art kit if he wanted it. I don't even know if there's a program like that anymore. There should be if there isn't. I was like intrigued by that. That was 2006. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Why would they offer a free art kit? So it was some agency or company that was offering, because they found that for people who are going through tough stuff, creativity is helpful. When we talk about post-traumatic, or what was the word what's the word?
Post-traumatic growth.
Growth, yes. So when we talk about post-traumatic growth, it's when we are going through something difficult, like the pandemic, and or grief, or a loss of job, and it makes it, I know I make it sound so simple, but there is something to taking that experience and making something good come from it. I mean, people say that all the time, maybe some good will come out of this and stuff, but we can do that by being creative, by utilizing our talents, by finding what it is that maybe we are called to do, or a purpose in our life. And you hear it all the time after somebody lost somebody, or even during this time, people who my sister was one of them, making masks. So she was sewing all hours and hours, and be up at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. Then she'd pass them out in the neighborhood, and the cloth and the beautiful masks that she was making. So we're hearing of people doing something good during a bad time and growing from it and becoming a better person. And that's part of my book, and part of creativity is using our talents to help others or to do something good. And I'm a different person than I was 10 years ago when I made the file folder of this book idea of, okay, there's something to this. I have grown, through and transformed through the deaths of not just my mother, but then my husband and my grandson. So I am a living proof that a person can become a better person and more empathetic. And I started a grief retreat at my workplace, and I've been doing that for 5 years. And that it has made me a better person. And I utilize my talents to do that. And so the people I work with do the same thing. They have the biggest hearts, and they are, because I work at a spirituality center, we do programs. And so we are speaking to the hearts of creative people. We are speaking to the hearts of people who are grieving, or people who want to be writers. We do a writers conference. So it's just that growth we don't hear about as much as we do about post-traumatic stress, but it's part of it. It can be part of it. And so when I took my mother's magic pencil, because the one I held up tonight is exactly like it, but I was so scared I was going to lose it. And I ordered a whole bunch of pencils on eBay, and then one of them looks exactly like hers. But I actually used that pencil in a piece of art in mixed media. And I talk about that in the book too, because I thought it's not fair for me to tell everybody in this book, try new things, allow yourself to fail, and then to be scared of a mixed media project, even though I knew that I wanted to use these little pieces of memories. I don't know about you, but I always had this stuff. I mean, I'm looking at it on the wall, but things from my childhood, even, or ticket stubs with my husband when we went to movies and things. And all that stuff sitting in a box did me no good. I never saw it. And so I used the pencil, I glued it to this mixed media project and was brave, like I'm asking people to be brave in the book and to try something new.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew it probably wasn't going to be amazing because I'd never done mixed media before. But by that time, working with other people and reading about creativity and stuff, I knew that it didn't matter what it looked like as long as I liked it and as long as I enjoyed it. And that's hard for us because we think if we want to paint, then it has to look a certain way or it's no good. I mean, we tend to be like that, especially the people amongst us who think everything has to look perfect or be perfect. So I kept that pencil and I see it now every day. It's on my wall along with other little pieces of my mother. And then I made one with in memory of my husband too. So I knew I just had to try something if I'm telling people. And I was scared. I was terrified to do that art piece because I thought, what if I ruin the pencil? What if it sticks? What if it looks horrible? What if I don't want to hang this on the wall? What if when I'm done it looks awful? I did have one artist help me a little bit. I mean, she just kind of guided me, but she didn't touch it. She just said, move it around, play with it. What does it look like? But it's like, okay, now I know that what I'm telling people in the book to do can be scary. It can be scary to try new things or allow yourself to fail.
Yeah, absolutely. So for people who are maybe starting completely, from the ground up, like they are thinking, okay, I feel like I need a creative outlet. I've even managed to set aside some time when I'm going to do it, but I don't know like what direction to go in. Like you said in the book, it was kind of always like you've always been drawn more towards the writing. What if someone doesn't necessarily have that, either because they've never thought about it or have never been told that they were good at any particular type of art?
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for like, how do you play around and find your thing without, like going on Michaels.com and buying like a ton of different supplies for no reason?
One thing you said was playing around. That's perfect. Sometimes we have to play as an adult. How many people I don't know what your town is like, but when I was taking walks at the beginning of the pandemic, I would walk past houses on the sidewalk was colored with chalk.
Yeah.
People had written some inspirational sayings or drew rainbows or sunshine or whatever. And those were lots of times adults doing that who probably would never have picked up a piece of chalk and thought to go color on their sidewalk. Yeah. So sometimes we have to go look back to our childhood and look at, well, what was it? And some of us have to look really far back to figure out what it was we were drawn to as children. Like when we were 5 years old, 6 years old, did we follow our dad around in the garden? Were we tempted by picking tomatoes? Did we follow our mother around in the kitchen, or our grandmother? Did we love it when she let us do the cookie dough with her? So if we can just look back to, did we make Barbie doll clothes by cutting two holes in and no snaps or anything. I mean, I did, and I've not touched any sewing since. I learned I'm not very good at that. But there's just something probably in your childhood, if you can look back and just take a moment, and we'll actually be doing that on Sunday, is taking a moment to look back. And I know I'm giving a little sneak peek to look back, and not only that, but what our parents or some adult, hopefully we had an adult, at least one, a teacher or something who saw something in us and maybe made a comment that at the time we're just like, why would you think that I would be good at that or something? But that adult may have seen something in us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of what we need to do. And it's like you said, not always easy if you haven't done anything. Because if you go to Michael's and just start shopping and filling your cart, you can spend a lot of money really fast. Trust me, my daughter, that's how she experiments with it. I want this paint, and I never say no to paint. I never say no to paper. I never say no to anything artistic. But it can add up really fast. One trip can be a lot of money. And then we go home and we're just looking at all these creative tools and we don't know what to do with them. And I don't know, I'm always drawn to scrapbooking stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I want to buy it all, but I've never made a scrapbook. And I don't know if I ever will, especially when I hear somebody who's really good at it say, oh yeah, this page took me 5 hours. And I'm thinking, that page took you 5 hours? Oh my gosh, that's not going to happen in this house. Maybe, I don't know. So, but I'm drawn to it. There's a reason. I don't know what it is, but you think about it. I did 2 mixed media projects. What do mixed media projects, what can they contain? What can they include? Pieces of paper. They can include things that you would use with a scrapbook.
Oh.
There, I think I was freezing.
Oh, you're back.
Okay.
Yeah, well, playing around definitely. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the workshop. We'll be doing a little more like actual, it'll be more interactive, like you were saying. So if anyone is interested in the workshop, you can register from the link at majorsandquinn.com. You go to our event listings, it's right there, or I just put it in the comments under this Facebook video. So if you're interested in that, there's still a few spots left. There's still a few pencil packs left that will get mailed out tomorrow, or if you don't sign up till the weekend, that's fine too. We'll send your pencil out to you as soon as we can. And yeah, we hope to see you there. So that's very exciting. If you're just interested in reading the book, maybe you're not available on Sunday, but you want to read more from Called to Be Creative, that book is available at majorsandquinn.com, and we've also put a link in to that in the comments here. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for watching. And thank you, Mary. This has been, it's a very good time for people to reflect about what makes them happy and what might come out of that creatively. So I hope that everyone watching is thinking about that, and hopefully is going to join us on Sunday. And we look forward to seeing you in a couple days. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And this video will continue to be available on the Majors and Quinn Facebook page and YouTube channel, so you can tune in anytime. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.